This is the first part in Grant's backstory. And one note, he was not always called Grant. His name was Jeent before this. So that's a little discrepancy there. I just went to make it more normal, common name. You don't see many Jeents around. But anyway, this is chapter 1. Jeent saw the colors converge around him, resolving into darkness. He looked around, and though it was dark middle of the night, he knew exactly where he was. He was back in the forge. And excitedly made his way out. It was the middle of the night, so there was no one around. He wasn't worried about being caught unawares. Nobody was going to be outside anyway, except for him, because he'd found an escape. He made his way out of the forge. He got to the front doors, and those were barred from the outside, and so he had to go to one of the windows that they cracked open to let air get through so that people didn't suffocate. So he cracked one of the windows and managed to pull himself out, hand still clutching the piece of charcoal that he'd been holding all day long. He got out and closed the window again and stepped out into the mists, which for his whole life he'd been taught to fear the mists, but now he didn't fear anything. He knew he had an escape. No matter what happened, he was free. Because he was able to leave this world behind. He traveled through the mists, stepping confidently down the barren streets, making his way back to the tenement where he had grown up. He got there and pounded on the door for them to let him in, and he could hear their voices inside. There was still a fire going, so it must not have been extremely late that he got back. He hadn't kept track of time. But he pounded on the door, and voices inside, he could hear them conferring, and one voice spoke out above the others and said to leave them alone. They weren't going to open the door. And Jeent said, "It's me, it's Jeent. You know me, I've come back." And the voices inside grumbled. He could recognize it as Drellid, the man who unofficially led them, though what was there to lead? Their lives were nothing. But Drellid responded. He said, "Jeent wouldn't survive, the mists are out. We're not taking in any mist wraiths." And Jeent continued to pound the door. He said, "It's me, you are Drellid. Your wife died 2 years back, and your son and your daughter, Kin, your only living daughter, is still alive. She's in there. She knows me. I'll talk to her if need be, but let me in. I'm coming in." And again, he could hear more conferring, and finally a younger voice came, Kin, and she called out Jeent, and he began to talk to her and told her about her life, things that he'd shared with her, things only Jeent would know. And there was some more conferring, and finally the door cracked open, and Jeent took a step back so they could see him, and they finally let it open further and pulled him inside. Some of the men were holding sticks menacingly. So what were they going to do to a mist wraith? But anyway, they let him in, and he went and sat by the fire as they locked the door back up. So as the mists began to pour in, they didn't want any of that in there. They huddled around the fire, and now we're very curious what in the world Jeent was doing outside. And he tried to tell them what he had seen, the colors, the scents, the tastes that he'd had, the freedom. He couldn't do it justice, and they didn't believe him. And he turned to Kin. Surely she would believe his words, but even she saw him as a fool. They said, "Jeent, you didn't eat anything today. You didn't work in the forge. You didn't get paid. You got no food. You're seeing things. You're delusional." He said, "No, I went somewhere else today. a place of freedom. And finally, relenting his treasure, he showed them the piece of charcoal in his hands. Every time he looked at it, he could see there was something more to it than anything else he had ever seen before. There was something special about this. And he showed it to them, and he said, "This is our salvation. We can leave." And from behind him, Thunt grabbed the piece of charcoal, and he said, "No!" He threw it on the ground and crushed it under the heel of his foot. And he said, "Jeent, you leave this behind, or you will starve to death. And you can do that if you want, but we care for you. We're not going to let you go. Leave this behind, get back to life, or you will starve to death." Jeent stared horrified at the splintered, shattered charcoal on the stones of the floor. It was gone. His freedom was gone. Drellid took him by the shoulders and encouraged everyone to get to bed. Tomorrow was going to be another day of drudgery, and they needed the rest for it. And Jeent stood. What else could he do? The charcoal was gone. Kin gave him a look of apology, but also confusion. She didn't understand. She could never understand, nor could any of them. Not unless they experienced themselves, and that wasn't going to happen. Jeent would never experience it again. He went to his spot on the floor and rolled fitfully throughout the night. Morning eventually came, and Drellid woke them all up. They got ready for the day and marched to the forge. Jeent went back to work, tried to forget everything that he'd experienced the day before. But after a few hours of working, he couldn't do it anymore. He had experienced life, freedom, color, and he could not live this life anymore. He had to get out. He knew that there was freedom and that he could get it. And he was going to find it no matter what it took. He dropped his work and strode out the front gates of the forge. The taskmaster moved to stop him, but then shrugged his shoulders, said, "You want to starve to death? Go for it. It's not my problem, but you're never coming back here." And Jeent strode off. He got to the street and dashed toward the tenement. Maybe there was a chance that there was still something left in the charcoal, or if not that, just something, but he would find it. As he ran, he bumped into a man who grabbed him by the shoulder and said, "Whoa, where are you running to so fast?" The shorter man to his side said, "Or what is he running from?" and glanced behind him. Jeent pulled himself out of the man's grip, noticing his scarred arms, and he said, "To freedom," and took off back down the street. Nothing was going to stop him. He got to the tenement, threw open the doors, and ran to the remnants of the charcoal from the day before. He scooped up the pieces, and looking closely, he could still feel the power within even the slivers of the charcoal. He held them tightly in his fist and closed his eyes, feeling out for the world that he had felt the day before. It was there, ready and waiting for him, and he took it, coming through the far side. Everything flashed into colors, plants everywhere the eye could see, animals roaming all over, and a sky of pure blue. He knew the others would never follow him here, but he would give them up for a life here. He threw his arm behind him, scattering the pieces of charcoal, because he was never going back.